like making sure, right? Okay, it does say that we're live.
It
And I
does.
think that this will go out to any of our audiences.
Okay. Hey, there's people.
And yeah, people are starting to join.
Oh, yep. I'm seeing it on mine right now.
I saw
So
Brooke. Is
good.
that the Brooke?
Probably.
Okay. So I'm so happy we could finally make this happen. Thank you guys. The life of three parents and busy working people trying to get things figured out. But so happy to have this conversation on uh fighting for better systems for childcare in this country. For those of you who don't know me, who are maybe from one of the other audiences, I'm Kate Duffy. I am a activist, content creator, marketer, digital strategist. I found a lifestyle brand called Motherhood for Good, and we do a lot of grassroots advocacy here in Wisconsin and around the nation, talking to like women and moms about getting them more involved in policy discussions and things that impact their lives and in more simple, approachable ways because everybody's very busy. So I know Corrine very well because we're both in Wisconsin, and anybody who does any sort of childcare advocacy work in Wisconsin knows who Corrine is. Um, Corrine, do you want to introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about all your knowledge and why you're here?
Sure. So, yes, that's so weird for me, was a family child care provider for about 18 years. I did just close my program down August 29th because our state and federal government are not um, including revenue to help me be able to function as a person in my own family and, contribute to my own household without having to raise my prices to the point where only the elite can afford me. And it got to the point where I was outpricing my families. And I made the very difficult decision to close down proactively instead of trying to stay open and fill 3 spots because I knew myself well enough to know that if I didn't have a place for those kids to go, that would be a safe, high quality environment. I would stay open and take the hit and basically bankrupt myself slowly until next summer when they could get in somewhere else. So I was very fortunate. I talked to a colleague here in New Glarus, and all the children, as long as their parents chose it, were able to get their kids in. And so they all moved together to the new place on September 2nd. They're doing really well. I've already gotten updates from the families and from her letting me know. And my substitute actually, the one family who just needed part-time, she was able to become their nanny. So I'm very pleased with how I was able to take care of them and now be able to take care of myself. So I'm doing some organizing work and some advocacy work and training, mentoring. We'll be subbing a little bit. And I've got some exciting news coming up next week about what's next for me too.
Well, that's amazing. Well, stay tuned for that. And obviously, it's so unfortunate that you had to close down. And we're so lucky that you've been vocal with your story and everything. And
Mhm.
people need to hear those stories because it's not talked about enough. And these are the ramifications of the decisions that our policymakers are making. Um, and Elliot, thank you for joining us. So you have quite the extensive background. You are really an expert in this space. I know you have it sounds like you have a background in education, but also you are a policy expert. You've written a couple books and you have a brand new one out. You have a Substack right here.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about your background and yeah, and what you do in the space.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And so I'm Elliot. I started my career in K-12 education. So I was a fourth grade public school teacher for a while and did a lot of sort of school improvement work, very focused on how do we help create more equitable opportunities for kids of all backgrounds. And then about a decade ago, shifted over more focusing on early childhood and childcare. And I was really born out of a realization that as important as schools are, there's so many more influences that go into child development and especially early childhood development, and then family stability and family economic security are massive influences. And it struck me that we really weren't kind of focusing enough on that. And so I transitioned more into childcare. But when you show up in the childcare sector from working in K-12 education, you're like, this is great. We get the whole child, whole family, like, but there's no money. There's no money in the system. You go from a system where it's a right in the state constitutions and they're, $14,000 per kid, and our schools are underfunded, but at least there's money there, to this like wasteland of like it's pay to play. Teachers are getting paid, poverty wages. No one seems to care about it very much in the policy space. And so that's what led me to write my first book, Crawling Behind, kind of trying to answer this question of like, why do we treat the first 5 years of life so radically differently than the next 12? And I've done various roles professionally. I've worked for early childhood nonprofits, worked for philanthropy. I currently work for a family policy think tank. And then my most recent book out last month is called Raising a Nation 10 Reasons Every American Has a Stake in Childcare for All. And that's really making more of a values based argument for how do we switch childcare from being seen as this in just purely individual service, more like a gym membership or something, and more move that into the bucket of being seen as a public good closer to a school or a park or a library, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and I'm a parent with young kids in childcare, and I didn't so I look at it from, the educators are so important to both of my kids in shaping them, and so I know how useful and valuable that is. I also know how expensive it is and how much of our paychecks go towards childcare, and at the same time, I sometimes pick up my kids and their teachers are talking about how they're like working their second job over the weekend, and they shouldn't have to do that. But I've also learned so much more about conversations I've had with Karina about those first 5 years and the brain development and how critical that is. And it is like the more I learn, it's just crazy to me that there is no real like public investment in that. Um, and I guess it just, like, doesn't really make sense to me, and I know I love how you talk about it as infrastructure. That's when, like, I heard people talking about it that it really started to, like, get my gears going and understand, like, when you talk about it, like, roads and bridges, these are things that everybody needs. Can you talk to us a little bit so in your new book, you talk about, like, it's
Yeah.
not just parents that need to care about this, it actually
Yeah.
everybody. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that without giving away the whole book?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's such an important point because until we realize that even the people who aren't directly affected, because the fact is that the parents of young children are dwarfed. We are overwhelmed. Well, I don't have young kids anymore, but even parents of school age kids too. We're overwhelmed by non-parents of young children in the electorate. There are just way more of them than there are of us. And so part of my argument is that there are many ways in which childcare affects more than just the family itself. And that ranges in the lots of different cases in the book, but it ranges to everything from if you like to have a well-staffed fire department and ambulance service that's going to show up to your house in a timely manner when it's on fire or your loved one's having a medical crisis, you really actually need a good childcare system. And I talk about like there's a rural city, I believe Colorado. There's a small rural town out in western Colorado, and the police chief is like on record saying, "I am like having trouble keeping my force staffed, like keeping public safety, because these officers come to me and they say, I'm having starting a family. There's no child care here, and I'm leaving." And like that is much more than just something that is like so like a gym membership or like getting a car. It affects so much more. We can talk about the different ways in which they act as community infrastructure. Childcare programs get involved in disaster aid, right? Like they get involved in helping people make friendships and social connections. And one thing I think is really sort of an important thing to an analog, I guess, is again thinking about the schools. I think it's pretty intuitive for most people to understand. I don't have school age children, or if I don't have children at all, I still need there to be strong public schools, right? So that's actually important. Like an education system matters, whether or not. And I'm going to pay taxes into it, and I might groan about it and grumble about it, but like I understand. But we need to help and guide people. And I think, Corinne, does such a good job, telling your story and making this clear as well to the fact that the same thing applies to childcare, that we really don't have functional societies and functional communities if we don't have childcare systems. And a lot of the struggles are policy choices. This is not just the way that it has to be.
Yeah, and I mean, Kareen, you've had conversations with so many people, both, citizens, constituents, and elected officials on both sides of the aisle. we talk about, it does have a branding problem. This isn't just like, oh, we need more money for this. I think it's this, and you really talk about this too. It's like, it's not like we just need a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. We almost need a mind shift in terms of like thinking about it as an investment. Like what are some of the misconceptions that you run up against when you're talking to either like regular parents and people or lawmakers even that like they're just not understanding it the way we need to be thinking about it?
I think a lot of it is we do have a lot of people who think your child, your problem, because we have this societal independent bootstraps, your choices. One of the things that insults me the most is when someone says, if you can't afford a child, you shouldn't have them. Well, I'm sorry. My husband lost his job when my kid was 6 months old. Was I supposed to shove him back up there? Like, come on. In 18 years, you're going to tell me you're going to be financially stable all the time. That's not reality. That's not life, right? And it's this whole judgment versus curiosity. Like, I'm judging you because you can't afford it. And so now I feel like a failure because as a parent, because I can't afford good care. And it's my fault that I'm at this place where there's 25 kids stuck in a tiny little house where they never get outside because that's all I can afford. And I'm a bad mom. Or so few of us are loud and vocal about closing. Like they're embarrassed that they had to close because they're a failure as a business owner. And it's not. I'm shouting it from the rooftops because this is not my fault. It's my fault that I will no longer accept the fact that was going to take a $10,000 pay cut this year. I guess that's my fault. I chose not to do that. But at the same time, it's like that's not a choice. And so really looking at it more as like, it's a contract. The state should be contracting with us to provide the service. Just like you get a contract to provide roads, right? Or construction. They make a contract with the state. They have an expectation that you're going to do these things. You're going to provide this service. You're going to make these roads, this building. Well, we already are told by the state you have to do these things, right? And that's a good reason. And I do not want us to get rid of, health and safety ratios and things because this is children's lives we're talking about. And if there's too many kids in the room, kids are going to get hurt. It's a safety issue. And then that adult that is trying to care for and educate them is going to get overwhelmed and bad things happen. Or you end up with, desperate people just needing a job. And again, that's when you run into these things that are happening. And more often that's happening, our insurance rates are, because of that, going up because kids are getting hurt unnecessarily because of the way that it's structured. And so we really need to change this mindset of we are contracting with the state to provide a service and we're getting paid X amount of dollars to do so. I think if we can start talking about it in that way, it might help with some of this mindset shifts. Because again, it's not your child, your problem, because if we do our jobs right while these kids are little and support them. And I'm all for even those parents who are able and willing to stay home. We need to support them as well, especially with understanding child development and the supports that they need so they're not so isolated. And really, like, there is a huge influx of kids coming into school that were never around other kids. And they're blaming COVID for this. And they're blaming COVID on all of the, special education. Well, no, the problem is they're not going to places with adults who can flag if there's something going on and get those kids referred to birth to three. Birth to three numbers were going down, but our school age referrals and evaluations are going up. And it's a disconnect because we're not catching these kids when they're little and getting them the support that they need so that when they get to school, they're already ready and maybe don't need speech anymore. They're getting flagged because now this child who could have had speech and benefited from it at 2 has gotten to the point where they're so frustrated and throwing temper tantrums and they're socially emotional because they can't communicate that now we're flagging them for other things when really at the end of the day, they needed that speech support. And so we're seeing more and more things happening. So these kids go to school. It's increasing our costs for the K-12 education because we don't have the childcare that's needed and necessary for these kids. They're not in places they should be. And the birth to prison pipeline, it's a thing. Wisconsin, our policy choice this year was instead of funding childcare, we increased the amount per incarcerated child to $1 million a year. That's insane to me. And yes, I'm glad that these kids are going to get the support that they need. But why are we spending $1 million a year for one child to be incarcerated when we could have done so much more for them when they were younger by investing in them appropriately?
I always want to ask the people who say that, like, don't the kids if we can't afford them, like, what's the next sentence in that logic? And what's the sentence after that? It's like, who exactly do you think is going to be, working at the hospital when you get old, and who is going to be paying into your social security, and who's paying into the highway trust funds? Right, and in Wisconsin, right? Like, I mean, this even goes into population dynamics. Like, you
Mhm,
are losing population, right? And that becomes a problem. If you're losing school enrollment, that puts school districts into crisis. School districts, which are massive employers in communities as
mhm.
well. I mean, there's all of these ripple effects, and again, like the number of families I've talked to, the number of parents I've talked to who say, I would have another kid with me right now if
Oh,
it
yeah.
wasn't for childcare. Like
Mhm.
that to me is that's not the sign of a healthy society. Like children should not be a luxury good. We should be able to have, enabling conditions and strong supports for all parents and all families. And I think that is a starting place because, yeah, otherwise we run into this all of these cascading negative effects.
Yeah, and same thing with parents having to decide what or plan their pregnancies based on when there's an opening for a childcare, or putting 4 or 5 years between your kids because you can't afford to have more than one in care at a time.
Mhm.
It's just ridiculous. Your family planning shouldn't be based on those external forces. It should be based on what you want with your family.
Yeah.
And I know there's many other countries who seem to have this figured out, right? And they've built it into their public infrastructure, and there's like little to no cost for high quality childcare, and it's just built into their public way of life. Obviously, we're a little bit different here in America. That's like not really our norm. But are there any, like, so, thinking about like, oh, long term, this would be the best way to do it, like what you were talking about with the contracts and more of a universal approach. Are there any like short-term policies that would help, or like have the short-term policy discussions almost hindered us to a point where like now we're just stuck nitpicking and we're missing the whole point? Like, are there any states
Yeah.
who are kind of figuring this out?
There are, and I think the question is like, is the incremental step actually taking us towards where we want to go, or are we just going into some cul-de-sac and like pretending, spinning our wheels and pretending that we're something? So several states have been putting the common theme is there are about a dozen states that have started to put in fairly large amounts of dedicated funding year over year into their childcare system. So the two you hear about most frequently are New Mexico and Vermont, and
Mhm.
they're done it in different ways. In New Mexico, they're tapping their natural resources trust fund, which is like their oil and gas revenues. Obviously, not every state has that. Vermont
Mhm.
actually did a payroll tax with the support of the business community, which is fascinating, and partially driven by concerns over their demographics, interestingly enough, because they're
Mhm.
an state with losing lots of young families. They've been really successful. Like as a result, like for New Mexico, you basically, if you're up to a fairly middle class salary, like 120 ish $1,000, and same for you can access childcare aid. In New Mexico, it's free for most
Mhm.
families, like a majority of families. It's not perfect. There obviously no one's completely solved it, and they still have issues with workforce and supply and all of that. But it's gotten better. Vermont has expanded. They've opened 90 new programs. Most of them are family child care centers. Most of them are in rural areas of Vermont. Not that there are a whole lot of non-rural areas of Vermont, but like 90 programs in Vermont is actually really significant for that population. Washington D.C. put in they do with a tax on high net worth individuals this thing called the Pay Equity Fund, which is intended to support the wages of childcare educators by putting them at pay parity with elementary school educators that have equivalent experience and credentials. And so you have these childcare educators in DC getting 10, 15, $20,000 raises over what they were making before. They also gave them a special status on their Affordable Care Act exchange marketplace, basically to get free or low cost healthcare. And this will shock you, they're gaining childcare educators and their retention rates have gone way up. I mean, like the quality is going up because they're in. So I think none of this is rocket science, right? Like you can fight, there's obviously technical things of how do you like do this in like in legislative language, but fundamentally, childcare is this public good miscast as a market, and the only way we solve it is by putting in lots of public money. And if I think people don't understand that, they just need to think about what would happen if instead of putting in $14,000 per K-12 kid, we started putting in $1,000 per K-12 kid, which is basically what we do for the early years. The whole thing would fall apart, right? It'd fall apart overnight.
Mhm.
It would turn into a pay-to-play system. Teachers would be paid nothing. It would be a huge mess. Similarly, like think about how our fire departments would work. We didn't fund them with public tax dollars. And so I think it's all of this rests on this foundation of public funding. And sometimes people ask me like, well, what are like the outside of the box, solutions? And there are like creative things you can do and there are innovations, don't get me wrong. But fundamentally, we don't have a box. So it's really hard to think outside the box.
We are outside the box.
Yes.
Yeah, just put us in the box. There
Right.
actually
In the
is a
box.
Get a
box
box. Right.
that
We're
works.
strewn on the ground right now. It's one of the box.
Oh my gosh. And so when you're having any of these like policy discussions behind closed doors with legislators or different groups, like, are you getting any are you feeling like there's momentum or movement? Are you like privy to the blockers that are like, is this something that people just are still finding too radical, even though it's not?
You go first, Karen. I can give you my
Okay.
perspective. Yeah.
So, put it this way, our representatives do not represent their constituents. The people I talk to, the people I see, I mean, I'm going to start hanging out at my grocery store all day long because I get pulled aside all the time at my grocery store. And like, I love what you're doing. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And these are people who don't have young kids. These are people who don't have grandkids. These are people who want grandkids, but their kids won't have kids because they can't afford them. Or these are people who I had my garage sale this last weekend to get, sell my things so I can afford to buy groceries. And so this woman, she has 10 grandkids. Her and her husband are taking care of their 10 grandkids, ages 6 and under, by themselves. And I'm like, wait, that's like not okay. Like the rate,
Right. You need to
like
register at
all
the
these
state.
things are like red flags to me, right? And
Yeah.
yes, it's great for grandparents who want to help and who can help, but that shouldn't be something that you're relying on and that you as a grandparent should have to feel you have to do. Like I am tired myself with 8 kids by myself that are like, 5 and under. I can't imagine 10 of them, 6 and under all day long. Like, come on. And so it really comes back down to our representatives need to represent the people. The people are telling them, like this, the number 1 and 2 things in Wisconsin were education and childcare and health, and 3 and healthcare was in there too. But not a single person said, do not invest in childcare, do not invest in our public schools. But then they took the funding away. And so we really need to get representatives who actually represent people in office, and we need to hold them accountable and remind them. And I really feel like we need more people, especially older men, to stand up and say more, because those are the people who actually are pulling me aside the most. And when I see them out in public is the older men. Like we are failing. They feel like they failed their families because it is this whole like, I want to take care of my family. I want to take care of my kids, my grandkids. And it's not happening. And helping them understand that then you need to pick up the phone call and you need the phone and call, or you need to show up in their office and say, hey, I'm your constituent and I support this, because the excuse I get from reps all the time is I'm told that they don't want their taxpayer dollars going for childcare. And I'm like, who are you talking to? Because that's not what I'm getting. And even the few people who are against it, when I talk to them a little bit more about, yes, it does affect you, because do you see these people in the grocery store working right now? They have kids that are in care. If they didn't have childcare, you wouldn't have a grocery store right now. And so helping people, like you were saying, Elliot, understand that it impacts them no matter what, I think is key.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say I am simultaneously optimistic and cautious about that optimism. The optimism, so I think increasingly, and honestly, since the pandemic, we've seen an uptick in generally an understanding across the aisle that childcare is a problem. Huge disagreements about what to do with it. But I can tell you that just in this last legislative session, Texas put in $100 million into their childcare system. That's new. Montana found like several $1 million out of a trust fund that they were creating, and they carved it out for childcare. That's new. We're having younger politicians start to step up. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm loudly a Democrat, so I'll just put that out there. But I will say, like people like Katie Britt, the senator from Alabama, who's a mother, right, who's been leading on some of these issues, on like in her caucus. Vice President Vance, like in his debate, with Governor Walz, was talking about like, yeah, we're gonna need to put some more money in this. Like, these are not my people who I have very much in common with, but I think you get the sense that like that is different than the Mitch McConnells and the world, who are very very old and had not really had much engagement with these issues. And on the other side too, right? Like I was recently speaking at an event, and the person who gave the opening remarks was Andy Kim, who's a senator from New Jersey. He's 43 years old, right? And he has young kids. And like that's new. Like that's different than and again, it's a man, to your point too. And so I think we've been fighting. I think there's some reinforcements that are starting to show up. I think where I get concerned though is what's actually required to the point about like what's an incremental solution, like what are we just like spinning our wheels versus actually are like that's different. And so I think for example, right, like look at what happened in Wisconsin. Like, it was cool to see Governor Evers say, I'm gonna veto a budget that doesn't have anything for childcare counts in it. Like that was but then my understanding, and he was saying, well, like what actually came out of the deal he did end up signing was pretty weak, right? And so I think that's the question is can we convert the broad understanding of the pain point that childcare is a problem in red states and blue states and rural areas and urban areas and whatever, wherever you're from, into real momentum of something that actually carries a price tag. Because unlike some other issues, like which are cultural battles, that don't marriage equality, things like that, there's no real price tag attached to that. So this is an extra degree of difficulty in some ways because we got to win the cultural battle and we have to win the how are you going to pay for it battle.
Yeah, and I think I know, especially for, you guys who are dealing with this day in and day out, it probably seems like nothing is changing, but it is that like Overton window. And we do see those things shifting and changing. And sometimes if you look back even just like a decade, it's like what I mean, President Obama, the first time he was running, like couldn't fully get on board with gay marriage, and
Yeah.
you think about that and then you look at where you've come. And I do think having a lot more younger parents in these like policy making positions, and the fact that if you think about the 1950s and 60s when a lot of women did stay home and take care of the kids, how much how many cultural changes we've had since then. We do just need to catch up, but it's just like beating that drum over and
Yeah.
over all day long until people start to realize, oh yeah, this is actually like this is fiscal responsibility, making the investment early that like has dividends that are going to pay off and create public safety for my kids and grandkids, and all of those things. And I'm sure you talk a ton about that in your book. So can you tell us again what your newest book is called and where people can get it and find your work?
Yeah, it's called Raising a Nation 10 Reasons Every American Has a Stake in Childcare for All. It is on Bookshop, it's on Amazon. You can get it from your local booksellers if you request it. Feel free to request it from your local library for them to get a copy. It should be basically everywhere. And yeah, and I think it's really, and I appreciate too, Kate, like even having this conversation because it's going to take getting to people who are not just the already converted, right? Like we have to get the message out. And then I'll tell you, and I don't know, Karen, if this is your experience. I've talked to a lot of parents of young children, like the people in the thick of it, who themselves don't understand why childcare costs so much, why childcare educators are paid so little, or the idea like that this is a policy choice, that this is something legitimate to put a claim on for public help. And so, even the most directly affected folks aren't necessarily like on board or certainly not picking up the phone and calling their representatives. And I think because of a lot of these misunderstandings that, Corinne said at the beginning about this sort of way we cast it very individually. And so, yeah, it feels transgressive in some ways to say, no, child, this is not working for me. And I need, and I deserve, frankly,
Yeah.
more support from society.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I had
somebody
to
said
echo that. The
somebody said in the
deserving
chat,
especially.
organize broad coalitions. Yeah, but going back to those people you see in the grocery store, it's like we need the grandpas to be like, "Hey, I love my grandkids. I'll love to babysit on date night, but I also want to enjoy my retirement." Okay, is that too
Yeah.
much to ask? And no, it shouldn't be. You should be able to enjoy your retirement without having and enjoy your grandkids when you can, and like be able to enjoy them without it being like a burden that's every single day, especially as you're aging. Sorry, Karina, I cut you off before, but what else did you wanna say as we
Yeah,
kinda
I
wrap
was just
up?
saying so often people don't think they deserve better or that it can be different. So part of the work that we've been doing with Wisconsin Early Childhood Action Needed is just having those conversations with other providers on how to talk to their families about these things. And it can be different. And having those difficult conversations when they're like, oh, you're raising your rates again. And instead of being like, yeah, sorry, it's like, yeah, this is why I'm raising my rates because my teachers are making $13 an hour. And if I want to give them $1 an hour raise, your tuition goes up $10 to $15 a week. So if we are going to get people up to $20 an hour, which is considered a livable wage, you're talking $70 to $100 more a week per parent, per child,
Mhm.
or per child. Like, it's impossible. And that's so without something else coming in and putting revenue in the pockets, it's gonna have to fall on the parents, and parents are at the beginning of their careers, and I've seen this is crazy, Elliot, I've seen it. People are like, "Well, we should start doing like HSAs where you can start saving money or like a college savings at 529." And I was like, "So my kid, when he's born, is supposed to have a 529 for college and for children? Like, what are we doing?"
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and it goes to show it's just like again, it's a framing thing. It's like that's so normal to open a
Mhm.
529 to save for college because it's an investment, but it's like, so thinking about it in a different way where we need to be able to have some sort of public infrastructure built for
Yeah,
this.
and it should be a right. Like, ultimately, that's what
Mhm.
it comes to. Like, there a rights claim and rights language is fundamentally different than talking about something as an individuated service. And that, to me, that's when we're going to know we're winning is when states start amending their constitutions to put in a right to childcare right next to their right to public education.
Yes, that. Okay, well, we'll get there and we'll just keep having these conversations
Yeah.
and yapping about it to everybody we see at the grocery store and going to the library and getting your book and reading it in public so people ask us what we're reading.
Yes.
So thank you guys both so
Thank you
much for
so
having
much,
this
Kate. Thank
conversation.
you, Karen. Yes, thank
Yes,
you. This
thank
is
you.
great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.